Hello, everyone, and welcome to ZAM Audiobook.
Thank you, Allie. I'm excited for today's discussion.
So I want to start by asking you to think about something. What if I told you that working hard, putting in those grueling 50-hour weeks and relentlessly climbing the corporate ladder to get that prestigious corner office, what if that is mathematically the worst way to actually become wealthy?
It's a tough pill to swallow, right?
Yeah, it really is. Because for the longest time, I was completely trapped in that exact illusion. I would look at the high salary executives, the people with the fancy titles who made everyone kind of nod in approval at dinner parties. And I thought, well, that is wealth. I thought if I just kept running on that treadmill, eventually I'd cross some invisible finish line.
Right, the finish line that constantly moves.
Exactly. But when you start separating the concepts of wealth, money, and status, it completely shatters that worldview. You realize that most of us aren't actually chasing wealth at all. We are just exhausting ourselves chasing two completely different things.
Yeah, society constantly conflates those three concepts. And that's exactly why we have a culture full of highly paid, deeply stressed, and honestly, incredibly poor people. I mean, poor in terms of actual freedom. Let's actually look at the mechanics of this triad, because understanding the underlying machinery here dictates pretty much every decision you make moving forward.
Okay, so let's break that down. Start with money.
Right, so money. We treat money as a goal, but structurally, money is just a tool. It's simply a mechanism for transferring time and value between people. Think of it as a social credit note. When you do something valuable for society, society hands you a piece of paper or, a digital token that basically says, here is an IOU. You provided value in the past. You can redeem this for someone else's value in the future.
It's just a placeholder for value.
Exactly. Now, status, on the other hand, is entirely different. Status is entirely about your place in the social hierarchy. And evolutionarily, status was a survival mechanism. Like in a hunter-gatherer tribe, the person at the top of the hierarchy ate first. Right. They reproduced most.
Right. So it's deeply wired into us.
Deeply wired. Because of that biological hardwiring, status games are ancient, they're deeply emotional, and crucially, they are zero-sum.
Meaning someone has to lose for someone to win?
Precisely. For you to move up the ladder, someone else mathematically must move down. There's only one CEO. There's only one person at the head of the table. But then we have true wealth. Wealth is having assets that earn while you sleep.
The holy grail, basically.
Yeah, it's the factory producing goods, the software program running on servers 24 hours a day, investments compounding, intellectual property generating royalties. Wealth is a system. It creates value completely independently of your immediate physical effort or your presence.
So if I'm listening to this right now, maybe I'm sitting in traffic commuting to a corporate job. I'm feeling some immediate friction with that breakdown because if I want the opportunity to build wealth, like say I want to get funding for my startup or I want to get invited to the partnership track where the real equity is, don't I have to play the status game?
You're talking about the networking, the prestige.
Yeah, exactly. Networking, building a prestigious reputation, wearing the right suit to the right meetings. It feels like if you refuse to play the status game, the gatekeepers just lock you out. It almost feels like status is the prerequisite password to unlock the...
I hear that a lot, but we need to distinguish between building a reputation for competence and getting sucked into a status game. A reputation for high integrity and extreme competence is a positive-sum asset. People want to work with you because you deliver. But playing purely for status usually involves tearing others down.
Because it's zero-sum.
Exactly. Because status is zero-sum, the people entrenched in those games maintain their position by attacking the people who are actually building things. You see this dynamic constantly, right? In office politics, on social media, or even in academia. The easiest way to elevate your own status without doing any hard work is to just criticize someone else's work.
Wow, yeah. That happens all the time on Twitter, or X rather. It's just constant tearing down.
Right. But wealth creation requires baking a bigger pie. If you write a piece of software that automates a painful accounting task for 1,000 small businesses, you haven't taken money from a fixed pot. You've created new efficiency, new time, and new value that literally did not exist yesterday. The danger of the status game is that it hijacks your dopamine system.
You get addicted to the likes.
You get addicted to the immediate hit of a promotion or social media validation, and you pour all your temporal and emotional energy into maintaining that rank. And the tragic part, you reach age 60 with an incredible title, a high salary, and zero underlying assets working for you.
That is terrifying, and it brings up a huge question. If wealth is fundamentally decoupled from time, how does a normal professional, like someone conditioned since kindergarten, to trade hours for grades and then hours for a paycheck, how do you actually pivot away from that?
It's a huge mental shift.
It really is. I call this the industrial age hangover. We have this deeply ingrained biological rhythm that says 8 hours of physical presence equals a good day's work. And the terrifying realization is that when you rent out your time, your potential is mathematically capped by the rotation of the Earth.
Because you literally run out of hours.
Exactly. Even if you are a world-class neurosurgeon charging $1,000 an hour, the absolute moment your hands leave the operating table, your income drops to zero. You are capped.
And that hangover comes directly from Taylorism, the scientific management theories of the early 1900s. The entire 40-hour work week was engineered for factory floors, where output is strictly linearly correlated to input. If a worker stands at an assembly line for 10 hours, they produce exactly twice as many widgets as they do in 5 hours.
Right. The math is simple there.
But the tragedy is that we took that factory floor architecture and we just copy-pasted it onto the modern knowledge economy. Knowledge workers, creatives, entrepreneurs, they're not factory workers. The value they create is nonlinear. They should actually operate the way elite athletes operate.
Like sprinting.
Yeah. An Olympic sprinter doesn't run for 8 hours straight. If they did, they would completely destroy their joints and their central nervous system. They train meticulously, they rest, they sprint at maximum biological capacity for a 20 fraction of time, and then they recover. Knowledge work requires that exact same oscillation. You need vast amounts of unstructured space to process information, followed by intense, high-leverage bursts of execution.
Let's apply that athlete model to an everyday business scenario to really see the contrast. So, the marathon approach is the middle manager who stays at the office until 9 p.m. every single night.
We all know that person.
We've all been that person. They are frantically replying to low-impact emails, organizing pointless syncs, and suffering from massive cognitive fatigue just to signal to the company that they are a hard worker. But the actual needle of the business hasn't moved an inch. They're just exhausted.
It's pure performance art.
Exactly. Now, the sprint approach is the engineer or the strategist who spends 4 hours just walking in the park, letting their subconscious map out a complex problem. Then, in a 2-hour window of deep focus, they rewrite a core piece of code that reduces server costs by $500,000 a year, or they write a pitch that closes a massive partnership. The value generated in those 2 hours completely dwarfs the 80 hours of performative email shuffling. The output is entirely disconnected from the time input.
But here's the catch. To permanently sever that connection between time and money, operating like a sprinter isn't enough on its own. You have to capture the value of the sprint through equity.
Ah, right. Because otherwise, someone else takes the profit.
Exactly. If that engineer saves the company $500,000, but only earns a fixed salary, they're still just renting out their judgment. The principal owners of the company capture the upside of that sprint. Without owning a piece of a business, a product, or the intellectual property, financial freedom is literally an impossibility.
Equity is the vehicle.
It is. It's the bucket that catches the compounding value of your high-leverage decisions while you were sleeping, while you were on vacation, and while you were walking in the park preparing for your next sprint.
Okay, but the obvious hurdle here is figuring out what exactly we should be sprinting at. If the goal is to build equity and earn with our minds, how do you identify the specific area where your judgment is actually valuable? Because the standard advice is always just, follow your passion.
Which is usually terrible advice.
Right. It usually results in people trying to monetize hobbies they aren't even very good at. But there's a much more clinical way to look at this, tracing back to what you were obsessed with before society told you what was valuable. If you think back to your teenage years or even childhood, there are activities you engaged in obsessively, effortlessly, just for the intrinsic reward of doing them.
And those intrinsic obsessions are the raw ore of what we call specific knowledge. Specific knowledge isn't a degree you can buy from a university. It is this highly unique, complex intersection of your genetics, your upbringing, your peculiar environmental inputs, and the way your brain naturally processes patterns.
So it's completely unique to you.
Exactly. The most important characteristic of specific knowledge is its unteachability in a formal setting. It can be learned, through deep immersion, apprenticeship, relentless trial and error, but it cannot be codified into a syllabus.
Why is that so economically important?
Because if society can train someone to do a job by putting them through a standard 4-year curriculum, Society can train someone else to do it. If you can be easily replaced by a newly minted graduate, your market value is just a race to the bottom. And honestly, in the near future, society won't even replace you with a graduate. It will train an algorithm to do it. Specific knowledge is your only permanent defense against commoditization.
Okay, but if I look at what teenagers actually spend their time doing, this theory hits a wall pretty quickly. What if my specific obsession is something completely unmonetizable? Let's say I spent thousands of hours in my youth playing complex, real-time strategy video games.
Okay, a very common one.
Yeah, or reading massive, thousand-page science fiction space operas. Or, to take a totally different angle, what if a teenager's obsession was just gossiping and analyzing the social dynamics of their high school cafeteria? I mean, none of those sound like the foundation of $1 million equity.
Well, that's the surface-level trap. The specific knowledge isn't the hobby itself. It is the underlying cognitive architecture that the hobby is building. Let's dissect your video game example. Someone playing thousands of hours of complex strategy games isn't just staring at pixels. Their brain is building an incredibly sophisticated, rapid-fire intuition for resource allocation, risk assessment, spatial reasoning, and game theory under extreme pressure.
Wow, I never thought of it like that.
Right. Those are the exact cognitive models required to be a world-class hedge fund manager or a startup founder navigating a rapidly changing market. Or take the teenager reading dense, speculative science fiction. They're developing the capacity to hold complex, abstract, futuristic models in their head. They're training their brain to extrapolate technological trends and understand alternate reality. That is the fundamental skill set of a top-tier venture capitalist or a product visionary.
And the gossiping team.
Even the teenager analyzing cafeteria social dynamics is building specific knowledge. They have a hyper-tuned radar for human psychology, unspoken incentives, and network mapping. That underlying skill is the toolkit of an elite negotiator, a political strategist, or a master recruiter.
So it's about looking under the hood of the obsession.
Exactly. The mechanism here is productizing yourself. You take these innate traits, you sharpen them with foundational skills like mathematics or persuasive writing, and you step into the market. When you operate from your authentic specific knowledge, the concept of competition dissolves because no one can compete with you on being you.
Okay, so operating authentically is the foundation, but a foundation doesn't scale on its own. You need a force multiplier. If your specific knowledge is the algorithm, leverage is the processing power you feed it. And historically, humanity only had access to two forms of leverage, and both were heavily gatekept.
Labor and capital.
Right. The oldest is labor getting other human beings to execute your idea. But labor is chaotic. It requires immense energy to manage egos, navigate office politics, handle human resources, and keep people motivated. It's just a massive, messy friction point. The second is capital using money to multiply your decisions, like buying a factory or investing in markets. But capital requires someone to give you the money.
Right, the gatekeepers.
Exactly. For centuries, if you weren't born into a wealthy family or couldn't convince a banker to trust you, you had zero access to leverage. Your ideas were just trapped in your own head. Which brings us to the profound structural shift of the modern economy, the emergence of permissionless leverage. This is a fundamental change in the physics of wealth creation. Permissionless leverage comes in two primary forms, code and media. And the magic mechanism here is the concept of zero marginal cost of replication. Can you unpack that? Zero marginal cost.
Sure. If you manufacture a physical good, say a customized desk, and 10,000 people want to buy it, you have to buy 10,000 units of wood, pay for 10,000 units of shipping, and hire a proportional amount of labor. Your costs scale linearly with your demand. But if you write a piece of software or if you record a digital audio file, it costs you your time and intellect to create it exactly once.
And then you just copy it forever.
Exactly. Whether one person downloads that software or 1 billion people download it, the cost to replicate and distribute it is virtually zero. And the key word is permissionless. You do not need a gatekeeper. You don't need a casting director to approve your media. You just publish it. You don't need a bank to fund your software. You just write the code. You encode your specific knowledge into a format that works tirelessly 24 hours a day at scale without requiring your physical presence.
But to wield that kind of power, you have to subject yourself to something that deeply terrifies the human nervous system, which is accountability. You cannot utilize permissionless leverage effectively if you are hiding behind a pseudonym or a corporate umbrella. You have to take risks under your own name.
You have to own the failures.
Yes. If you write a piece of code and it breaks, The failure is publicly yours. If you publish an idea and it is ridiculed, your personal reputation takes. From an evolutionary standpoint, social rejection feels like physical pain, which is exactly why most people instinctively avoid accountability.
But the market pays an extraordinary premium for that exact terror. Society inherently rewards those who take on personal accountability because it operates as a signal of high conviction. When you put your name on the line, you're utilizing skin in the game. You're telling the market, I am so confident in the value I am providing that I will absorb the downside risk to my reputation.
And when you do that consistently, and you actually deliver, the market funnels three things directly to you: responsibility, trust, and equity. The people who capture the most asymmetric wealth in any industry are the ones operating in their specific knowledge, utilizing high leverage, and bearing the full public weight of accountability for the outcomes. And when we stretch that accountability over a long enough timeline, we start to see the mechanics of compound interest. We usually restrict that phrase to financial portfolios, right? You put money in an index fund, leave it alone for 30 years, and the mathematical curve goes vertical at the end. But applying the mathematics of compounding to human reputation and relationships fundamentally changes how you interact with the world.
It really does. Because a sterling reputation is not built in a week.
No, it's built by showing up, bearing accountability, and delivering high value over a span of decades. And just like capital, the value of that reputation compounds. By year 20, you aren't pitching yourself anymore. The friction of doing business drops to zero because your reputation enters the room and closes the deal before you even speak. It becomes an impenetrable moat.
And to allow that reputation to compound without interruption, the selection of your partners becomes a life or death decision for your wealth. This is where game theory provides a brilliant framework, specifically the iterated prisoner's dilemma.
Oh, I love this concept.
Yeah, so in a short-term, one-off transaction like a tourist trap restaurant, the optimal strategy is actually to cheat. The restaurant gives you terrible food at a high price because they know you're getting on a plane tomorrow and will never return.
They have no incentive to be good.
Right.
But in a long-term game, like a local neighborhood bakery, the optimal strategy is profound cooperation. If they cheat you, you never come back and they go bankrupt. Therefore, the heuristic for navigating relationships is ruthless but entirely necessary. If you can't see yourself working with someone for life, don't work with them for a day. That is such a high bar.
It is. But in long-term games, people behave impeccably because they recognize the real payout is 20 years away. Intentions are irrelevant. Only consistent actions matter. Finding high-integrity people who understand positive sum dynamics is statistically rare. But when you find them, you lock in and refuse to let go.
Think about the sheer volume of friction and wasted energy in the early stages of a career or a business. You partner with vendors who cut corners, you hire employees who don't care, you work for bosses who play zero-sum status games. It feels incredibly inefficient, very similar to dating before you find a spouse. You expend massive amounts of emotional bandwidth trying to figure out compatibility, dealing with miscommunications, and eventually breaking up the partnership.
It's exhausting.
It really is. Fundamentally, 99% of that effort is waste, in the sense that it does not result in a compounding asset. You take jobs you won't stay at, you read books you drop after chapter 2, you start projects that fail. But it isn't a tragedy. It's a sorting mechanism. The goal is to aggressively filter out the short-term players. Because the moment you find that 1%, the business partner you trust implicitly, the specific knowledge you want to dedicate your life to, that 1% requires total obsessive dedication.
And the transition from that 99% exploration phase to the 1% exploitation phase requires a fascinating psychological paradox.
Yes.
You cultivate extreme impatience with your daily actions while maintaining profound patience with the macro results.
Impatience with actions, patience. I love that.
Yeah, impatience with actions means you execute the sprint today. You don't delay the hard conversation. You don't procrastinate writing the code. You push the velocity of your daily output to the absolute maximum. But patience with results means you understand compounding takes time. You don't check your bank account every morning expecting the compounding curve to have gone vertical overnight. You let the timeline do the heavy lifting while you focus on the daily velocity.
So if we are playing games that span decades, Raw effort stops being the primary driver. The quality of our navigation, our judgment, becomes everything. Judgment is the practical application of wisdom to the messy, immediate data in front of you. But the biggest threat to clear decision-making isn't a lack of information, it is our own ego generating cognitive.
Our ego is a massive filter.
It is. We have this terrifying psychological mechanism that edits reality to match what we actually want to be true. A founder will ignore glaring structural flaws in a product because admitting the flaw means admitting they wasted 6 months of their life building it. An investor will ignore red flags in a founder because they already committed capital and want to look smart to their limited partners.
The ego protects itself by outsourcing critical thinking to rigid identities. When you define yourself heavily by a political ideology, a corporate title, or a specific movement, your brain literally stops analyzing new information from first principles. Instead, your cognitive resources are hijacked to defend the identity. If an idea contradicts your chosen group, you reject it, not because it's mathematically wrong, but because accepting it would cause a crisis of identity.
So how do we bypass that? You have to practice identity detachment. There is a deeply useful concept here. Tension is who you think you should be. Relaxation is who you are. When you drop the heavy armor of identity, you relax into objective reality. You can look at a massive failure and say, I was entirely wrong about this market, without feeling like you are annihilating your sense of self. That's powerful. And you also need mechanical heuristics to force clarity when the ego tries to muddy the waters. The first one is binary. If you cannot decide, the answer is no. If you are agonizing over a business partnership, building complex spreadsheets of pros and cons, the underlying intuition is already telling you there is a fatal flaw. A true yes doesn't require a spreadsheet. It is visceral. If it's not a hell yes, it's a no.
Exactly. The second heuristic is to run uphill. When you are evenly split between two choices, force yourself to take the path that is more painful in the short term. The human brain is evolutionarily wired to conserve energy and avoid immediate pain, even if that pain is the exact catalyst required for long-term growth. Running uphill counteracts that biological laziness.
Another mental model that instantly clears the fog in business decisions is the principal-agent problem. This explains almost all organizational dysfunction. Imagine you own a house and the roof is leaking. You hire a contractor to fix it. You are the principal. You own the underlying asset and care deeply about its structural integrity for the next 30 years.
And the contractor is the agent.
Right. They are hired for a specific task. No matter how ethical the contractor is, their primary incentive is to finish the job quickly, maximize their margin, and move to the next house. The incentives are structurally misaligned. You see this mechanism everywhere. It's why people will drive a rental car over a speed bump at 40 miles an hour, but they will carefully inch their own car over it.
Because they don't own the rental.
Exactly. It's why corporate executives will spend millions on unnecessary acquisitions to boost their short-term bonus, destroying the company's long-term value. The takeaway is to ruthlessly analyze when you are dealing with agents, and more importantly, to ensure you are operating as a principal in your own life. Take extreme ownership because the universe does not care about your assets.
And operating as a principal means taking absolute responsibility for your own continuous cognitive upgrade. The ultimate mechanism for that upgrade is deep reading. Reading isn't just an input method. It is the foundational meta skill. If you can read deeply, comprehend complex abstractions, and synthesize that information, you possess the master key to learn literally anything.
But we have this dangerous societal assumption that education is a localized event, like something that happens in a brick building until you are 22, at which point you are handed a piece of paper and you just stop. But in an economy driven by technological leverage, where the half-life of a learned skill is shrinking every single year, stopping your education is economic suicide.
Absolutely. The friction people feel with reading usually stems from forcing themselves to read things they think they should read, rather than what actually captures their attention. The psychological trick is to read what you genuinely love until you love the physical habit of reading. If that means reading graphic novels, pulp sci-fi, or romance, start there. You are building the neural pathways for a sustained, focused attention in an era of fractured dopamine.
And once you build that habit,
And once that habit is cemented, the brain naturally craves more dense, nutritious material. When you make that pivot, you must prioritize foundational frameworks over hyper-specialized modern tactics. The internet is constantly screaming at you to learn the latest digital marketing software or master a new social media algorithm. But those platforms change their rules every 6 months. That knowledge is highly perishable.
so what should we focus on instead? Instead, you build your cognitive foundation on bedrock. Basic arithmetic, Probability, game theory, microeconomics, evolutionary biology, and classical philosophy. These disciplines explain the invisible machinery of the world. Human nature hasn't changed in thousands of years, and the laws of mathematics will never change. If you have a deep understanding of probability and human incentives, you can instantly decode any new technological trend that emerges for your life. Okay, but if I spend all day reading Stoic philosophy and studying probability theory, aren't I going to be completely blind to what's happening right now? The standard advice is that you have to consume the daily news, track the market fluctuation, and stay on top of industry gossip to remain competitive. If I ignore the daily feed in favor of old books, won't I get left behind in a fast-moving?
Well, the news cycle is a masterclass in cognitive exploitation. It is specifically engineered to hijack your amygdala, the fear center of your brain. Media algorithms don't optimize for truth or actionable value. They optimize for engagement, which is most easily triggered by outrage and anxiety.
So it's mostly noise.
The vast majority of daily news is pure noise. It is perishable information that will be completely irrelevant by next Tuesday. On the other hand, foundational texts operate on the Lindy effect. The Lindy effect states that the future life expectancy of a non-perishable idea is proportional to its current age. If a concept from a Roman philosopher or an 18th century economist is still highly applicable today, it has survived the ultimate stress test of time. It is pure signal.
That makes so much sense.
Spending 1 hour a day reading difficult foundational concepts will compound your judgment infinitely more than 3 hours of scrolling through geopolitical anxiety. And when those foundational books confuse you, don't quit. Confusion is just the neurological sensation of your brain forming new synaptic. Just like muscle pain in the gym is the biology of growth, cognitive strain is the feeling of getting smarter. But finding that hour a day to read requires a ruthless approach to time, and the easiest way to cut through the clutter of a busy schedule is to ask a very uncomfortable question. How much is 1 hour of your time actually worth? Most people have never. If you want to force your brain to prioritize leverage, you must establish an aspirational hourly rate, and it needs to be absurdly high. Like what?
Well, if your current salary breaks down to $30 an hour, you set your internal aspirational rate to $500 or even $5,000. Once you anchor that number in your psychology, it becomes an automatic. If you are debating whether to hire someone to mow your lawn, build a spreadsheet, or run an errand for $25 an hour, and your aspirational rate is $500, doing the task yourself is mathematically irrational. You are actively destroying value. You must ruthlessly outsource or simply drop tasks that fall below that threshold. And that mathematical ruthless is the only way to protect the most vital yet terrifying resource for a knowledge. Look at the calendar of a modern course, a solid wall of back-to-back meetings, We have culturally decided that busyness is a proxy for importance. But structurally, if your calendar is completely full, you are trapped in a state. You are managing logistics, not generating insight, because insight requires downtime.
Exactly. Insight requires the brain's default mode network to activate. The default mode network is the neurological system that connects disparate ideas and forms creative solutions, but it only powers up when the brain is resting and unfocused. In a highly leveraged world where you are wielding code or capital, one brilliant strategic pivot can generate millions of dollars. But that pivot will never occur to you if your cognitive bandwidth is maxed out responding to Slack messages. To actually clear that space, you have to apply a strict mechanical order of operation. Eliminate, automate, and delegate. The sequence is non-negotiable. The most common trap is trying to delegate a broken process. You hire an assistant to manage a chaotic inbox, or you buy expensive software to automate the generation of a weekly report that nobody actually reads, right? Which just creates more work. Exactly. The rule is this: never automate what can be eliminated entirely. If a task does not generate value, stopping it requires zero energy and zero cost. Never delegate what can be automated. If a simple script or a software tool can handle data entry, do not introduce the friction and cost of a human agent. You eliminate the useless, you automate the repetitive, and you only delegate the tasks that require human judgment but fall below your aspirational hourly rate. Only then does the empty space emerge. And this transitions us to a completely different kind of wealth. Let's assume the mechanics work. You build the specific knowledge, you deploy the permissionless leverage, you protect your time, and the wealth compounds. You hit the financial targets. This is where the ultimate psychological plot twist happens.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
You wake up one day and realize that achieving those massive external goals is fantastic for solving money problems. It removes the baseline stress of paying rent, it buys better health care, and it buys optionality. But it does absolutely zero to alter your internal baseline of happiness. The biological anxiety that drove you to build the wealth doesn't just evaporate, it immediately searches for a new target to latch onto. We have to pivot the framework from acquiring external leverage to engineering internal peace, because wealth without happiness is just a very comfortable prison.
So how do we engineer that piece?
To engineer that piece, we first have to demolish the cultural definition of happiness. We are sold a biological lie that happiness is a state of constant, ecstatic joy. It is portrayed as the dopamine spike you get from buying the car, getting the promotion, or experiencing a thrill. But neurologically, a dopamine spike is always followed by a crash. It is a pendulum. Every high implies a corresponding low to return the brain to homeostasis. Chasing ecstatic joy is exhausting because you are constantly fighting your own neurochemistry.
So what is true happiness then?
True happiness is entirely different. It is not an additive state, it is a subtractive state. Happiness is the default condition that naturally emerges when you remove the sense that something is missing. It's the absence of friction. If you look at the natural world, a tree is not anxious about its growth rate. A mountain is not unhappy that it isn't taller. Nature operates on a continuous, neutral chain of cause and effect. The friction only exists in the human mind, which insists on taking a neutral event and applying a subjective label of good or bad to it. When you stop demanding that the universe conform to your specific preferences, the labeling stops. When the labeling stops, the friction stops. What remains is profound inner peace. If happiness is the absence of friction, we have to isolate the mechanism that generates that friction. And this leads to a concept that is deeply uncomfortable to accept, but entirely liberating once you do. Desire is a contract you make with yourself to be unhappy until you get what you want. That is such a profound way to frame it.
It really is. Think about the mechanics of that. Every single time you say, I want that new house, or I want my boss to recognize my work, you are unconsciously signing a psychological contract. You are agreeing to feel inadequate, restless, and incomplete until that specific external condition is met. And the grand illusion is the belief that fulfilling the contract will bring permanent peace. It never does. The moment you get the house, the hedonic treadmill activates, the baseline resets, and you instantly sign a new contract for.
We are chronically infected with these contracts. We walk around all day carrying 1,000 tiny desires. We want the weather to be better. We want our coffee to be hotter. You want our partner to act differently. We want more followers online. These myriad petty desires pull our attention in 100 directions, generating a constant, exhausting hum of baseline anxiety.
So we just drop all desires.
No, the strategy isn't to eradicate all desire and sit motionless in a cave. You have to engage with reality. The wisdom is in extreme, ruthless selectivity. You must urge yourself to pick exactly one major desire at a time. Let that be your singular driving focus. If your one chosen desire is to build a high-leverage business, accept the contract. Accept that you will feel driven and dissatisfied until it is built. But because you are carrying that massive cognitive load, you must consciously, aggressively let go of all the other petty desires. You cannot simultaneously obsess over having a perfect golf swing, an immaculate house, and a flawless social life. Drop the trivial contracts so you can focus entirely on the one mountain you have chosen to climb.
But wait, if I'm listening to this while trying to pay off a mortgage and claw my way out of debt, telling me to just drop my desires feels a little out of touch. How does a normal person reconcile the burning ambition required to build wealth, the sprinting, the leveraging, the risk-taking, this philosophical mandate to drop desires and find peace? If I'm completely peaceful and content, why would I ever put in the grueling work to build a company or improve my life?
It's a beautiful tension, and resolving it is the master skill of a well-lived life. You have to understand that success and happiness operate on entirely different engines. Success, in the external world, is powered by dissatisfaction. You observe the current state of the world, you find it lacking, and you possess the drive and vision to alter it. Happiness, however, is powered by absolute contentment, accepting the world exactly as it is, without wishing it were different.
So you can't be both at the same time.
You cannot experience both states in the exact same millisecond regarding the exact same object. The solution is the deliberate, conscious oscillation between the two. When you enter the arena to work, you boot up the ambition. You operate with intense dissatisfaction regarding the process. You sprint. You optimize, you push for excellence. But the moment the work session ends and you step out of the arena, you must execute a hard cognitive pivot. You look at the results of your sprint, whether you succeeded brilliantly or failed miserably, with deep patience and total acceptance. You are fiercely impatient with the action, but profoundly at peace with the result.
Executing that pivot is incredibly difficult when we live in a digital ecosystem designed to maximize social comparison. You finish your sprint, you try to find peace with the result, and then you open your phone and see a peer who just sold their company for $50 million, or someone lounging on a yacht with perfect abs. Envy is a corrosive acid to cognitive clarity.
It destroys your peace instantly.
It does, but there is a phenomenal mental tool to short-circuit envy instantly. It is the 100% life swap rule. When you feel envy, your brain is committing a severe statistical error. It is extracting one single variable from a highly complex system, someone's wealth or their spouse or their physique, and wishing you could append that single variable onto your own life. But reality is a package deal. You cannot cherry-pick attributes.
You have to take the whole thing.
Exactly. To legitimately envy someone, you must be willing to execute a 100% life swap. You have to take their bank account, yes, but you must also take their hidden autoimmune disease, their childhood trauma, their toxic family dynamics, and their deepest, darkest insecurities 24 hours a day for the rest of.
When you force your brain to evaluate the entire multivariate reality of another human being, the envy instantly evaporates. Because when faced with the totality of someone else's suffering and neuroses, you realize you would never actually trade your exact consciousness, your unique memories, and your specific worldview for theirs. You just want to be you in slightly upgraded circumstances.
Right, we just want the shiny part.
Exactly. Envy is the ultimate symptom of playing multiplayer games. Society is structured to push us into these arenas. We compete for grades, for job titles, for likes, for social validation. It demands that we look sideways to gauge our worth. But you must internalize that life, at its absolute metaphysical core, is a single-player game. You are born entirely alone into your own consciousness. You interpret every physical sensation, every profound heartbreak, and every moment of joy entirely alone inside the theater of your own mind. And you will die alone. The external scoreboards are societal illusions. The only metric that holds any actual weight is whether you can sit quietly in a room by yourself and be at peace with the player.
If life is a single-player game, how do we systematically train the player? We can discuss the philosophy of dropping desires and finding peace, but unless it is grounded in physical, neurological reality, it's just poetry. You do not rise to the level of your philosophical epiphanies. You fall to the level of your biological systems and daily habits. If you want a peaceful mind and clear judgment, you have to build mechanical systems that manufacture those states on autopilot.
Let's analyze the biology of those systems. The highest leverage habit for internal peace is meditation. But we need to strip away the mysticism and look at the mechanics. Think of meditation as intermittent fasting for the brain. Every single day, your brain receives tens of thousands of inputs, emails, conversations, advertisements, social cues. It is a massive cognitive inbox. And for most people, it is overflowing.
We were constantly bombarded.
Constantly. Meditation is the act of sitting quietly and allowing the brain's default mode network to process that backlog. It is running a background diagnostic. If you never sit in silence, you carry years of unprocessed cognitive baggage, which manifests physiologically as chronic stress and brain fog. Then we have to address the physical chassis. You cannot sustain clear, high-level judgment if your biology is chaotic. Getting rigorous cardiovascular exercise flushes cortisol, the stress hormone, from your bloodstream. Prioritizing direct sunlight in your eyes within an hour of waking up triggers a cortisol pulse that sets your circadian rhythm, optimizing your melatonin production for deep sleep 14 hours later.
And we have to talk about caffeine.
Oh, definitely. You must analyze chemical dependencies, specifically caffeine. Caffeine blocks adenosine receptors, preventing you from feeling tired. But it also triggers the release of adrenaline. It literally mimics the biological state of anxiety. If you are struggling with a racing mind, removing the chemical that artificially induces fight or flight is the simplest mechanical fix.
To add to that biological stack, there is a neuroplasticity habit I rely on heavily, which I call the 90-second reframing rule. Our brains are evolutionarily hardwired with a negativity bias. Spotting danger kept our ancestors alive. So when a colleague sends a passive-aggressive email or someone cuts you off in traffic, your amygdala instantly fires, flooding your system with stress hormones and defensive scenarios.
You go straight into fight or flight. Exactly. But here's the mechanical trick. You have about a 90-second window before those neurochemicals completely hijack your mood. In that window, you force your brain to ask one question. What is the most positive, empathetic interpretation of this event? Maybe the person who cut you off is rushing a sick child to the hospital. Maybe the colleague who snapped at you is dealing with a severe personal crisis and is just overwhelmed. It does not matter if the narrative is factually true. The purpose of the exercise is to short-circuit the amygdala. By forcing the brain to generate an empathetic reframe, you carve a new neural pathway. You prevent a minor annoyance from turning into a 2-hour internal argument that drains your strategic bandwidth. And protecting your bandwidth also requires a brutal audit of the external environment. Specifically, if our mirror neurons naturally mimic the behavior in the people closest to us, we have to curate that intentionally.
We become who we hang out with. We
Yeah.
really do. The heuristic for this is highly practical. When you are working, surround yourself with people who are more successful than you. When you are playing, surround yourself with people who are happier than you. In the arena of work, you actively want to be the least competent person in the room. You want peers whose baseline standards make you uncomfortable, who challenge your cognitive biases, and who demonstrate what a higher level of leverage looks like. But you don't want those people at your weekend barbecue.
Exactly. The moment you leave the arena, you must switch network. You do not want to relax around hyper-competitive, anxious workaholics who treat leisure as a networking opportunity. You want to be around people who possess the rare ability to be entirely present, who can laugh deeply, and who don't check their phones during a meal.
Curating that external environment naturally forces you to audit your internal dialogue, particularly your relationship with the word should. The word should is one of the most dangerous words in the English language. When you catch yourself thinking, I should go to this networking event, or I should buy a house because I'm 30, or I should read this specific book, your brain is waving a massive red flag.
It's usually not your own voice.
It isn't. Should almost always indicates mimetic desire. The phenomenon where we do not actually want a thing, we just want it because we see other people wanting it. It is external social programming masked as internal motivation. If the desire were authentic, your internal dialogue would be, I want to do this. Eliminating the shoulds from your decision-making strips away the immense cognitive weight of living out someone else's script.
And this directly maps onto how our definition of freedom evolves over a lifetime. When you are in your 20s, freedom is almost entirely defined as freedom too. You want the freedom to travel, the freedom to buy what you want, the freedom to start a company. It is an expansive, consumptive, external definition.
Which is natural when you're young.
Right, but as you mature and gain wisdom, the definition inverts. You transition to seeking freedom from. You want freedom from the impulse to react to anger, freedom from external expectations, freedom from the biological craving for dopamine, freedom from the anxiety of the future. Freedom is about acquiring external options. Freedom is about cultivating internal invincibility.
Acquiring that internal invincibility is the ultimate goal, but we have to ground all of this philosophy in practical economic reality. How does a listener actually structure their life tomorrow morning to maximize both their wealth and their peace? The mechanical strategy is to adopt a posture of rational optimism. This means actively hunting for and executing bets that possess massive asymmetric upside, but where the downside is strictly mathematically capped.
Give me an example of that.
Okay, for example, deciding to spend your weekends learning to write code or starting a niche podcast or writing a newsletter. What is the actual downside risk? You lose a few hundred hours of leisure time, maybe a few dollars in server hosting, and you might experience a minor blow to your ego if no one pays attention. The downside is tiny and strictly contained. But what is the upside? The upside is exponential permissionless leverage. You could build a software tool that generates infinite margin, or attract a network of high-integrity partners, or discover a massive audience. Rational optimism is recognizing that if you continuously take small bets where the downside is capped but the upside is infinite, mathematics dictates that you will eventually get very, very lucky.
To execute those asymmetric bets, you must accept that the highest yielding asset class you will ever have access to is not venture capital, it is not real estate, and it is not index funds. It is your own cognitive capacity. Before you spend a single hour agonizing over macroeconomic trends or complex financial instruments that you have zero control over, you must deploy capital and time into building your specific knowledge.
Invest in yourself first.
Always. Invest in mastering clear, persuasive written communication. Invest in understanding probability. Invest in the technical skills required to wield permissionless leverage. These are foundational investments that can never be taxed, can never be stolen, and will not depreciate in a market crash. However, to unlock the cognitive bandwidth required to focus on those high-level investments, you must secure your biological and financial base. You have to automate your financial defense.
What does that look like practically?
This means setting up mechanical systems that operate without your daily input. Automate the aggressive elimination of high-interest consumer debt. Automate a fixed percentage of your income to flow directly into a low-cost index fund the moment your paycheck clears, before you even see the money. Build the emergency reserve. When you automate your defense, you eliminate the low-level, grinding survival anxiety that drains your daily energy. You free up the massive processing power required to sprint, build leverage, and achieve true wealth.
When you weave all of these distinct threads together, the aggressive mathematical pursuit of leveraged wealth, the reliance on objective mental models, and the deep internal work of dropping desires to find peace, you arrive at a very unique operating system. It is a philosophy that marries the hard, unforgiving realism of evolutionary biology and economics with the timeless internal stillness of ancient wisdom. Let's call it rational Buddhism.
I like that term, rational Buddhism.
And the anchor of this entire operating system, the concept that truly grounds it in reality, is staring directly at our own mortality. It sounds terrifying to confront death, but mechanically it is the ultimate pressure release valve. On a cosmic scale, human existence is a microscopic blink in the dark. We are here for an infinitesimally short window of time. When you truly, deeply internalize the brevity of your life and the fact that 100 years from now, you and everyone you know will be entirely forgotten, it destroys the ego.
It really puts things in perspective.
It makes all the bitter office politics, the desperate status games, and the anxiety about what strangers on the internet think of you seem completely absurd. If the timeline is that short, engaging in anything other than exactly what you want to do with the people you deeply love, building things that fascinate you, is just a mathematical error. That acute awareness of time clarifies exactly what we are optimizing. Throughout this discussion, we have explored the mechanics of the ultimate human trifecta: wealth, health, and happiness. It's as fascinating to observe how the human relationship with those three variables shifts over a lifespan.
Yeah, the timing is always off for most people.
Right. When you are young, you possess abundant time and boundless physical health, but you have absolutely no wealth. During middle age, you are in your peak earning years, generating wealth and hopefully maintaining health, but your time is entirely consumed by obligation. And in old age, you finally have abundant time and accumulated wealth, but your health is rapidly decaying. So the goal is to get all three.
Exactly. The masterpiece of a consciously designed life is to break that chronological trap and strive for all three simultaneously. You build wealth systems and assets that generate cash independently of your labor, specifically to buy back your time. You fiercely prioritize your health, your circadian rhythms, your cortisol levels, your physical strength, so you have the vital machinery to actually experience that time. And you cultivate happiness, a peaceful, desire-free mind, so you can inhabit the present moment without constantly hallucinating a better future. And as you navigate the friction of everyday life trying to build this trifecta, rely on the ultimate decision-making. In any challenging situation, you have exactly three choices. You can change it, you can accept it, or you can leave. Change it, accept it.
Right. If you accept temporary dissatisfaction, sprint to the problem. Leave it, you only walk away and sever the attachment. You accept it, you drop the demand, that reality to your wishes, and you find absolutely exactly.
So it's the wrong choice. The only incorrect choice, the choice that guarantees a life of misery, is the one most of society defaults to. Sitting around, refusing to change it, refusing to leave it, and refusing to accept it, opting instead to suffer in a perpetual state of complaint. Choose one of the three. Execute it, and move forward. We have covered an immense amount of ground today, from the physics of zero marginal cost to the neurobiology of desire. We really have. But I wanted to leave you, the listener, with one final practical point of friction to analyze. We discussed the danger of mimetic desire and the tyranny of the word should. I want you to examine your life right now and identify the single largest should you're carrying. What is the one major obligation, the specific career path, or the social expectation that you are dragging yourself through purely out of guilt or external pressure? Find it. Look at it objectively, and then ask yourself the terrifying, what would actually happen to your life if you dropped it? That is a brilliant challenge. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of building wealth, mastering judgment, and finding peace. Until next time, take care of yourselves and protect your peace.